Good evening, madam. I am Aiman Zahim bin Zamri. My matrix number is 10DIB 21F1059. Today, I and my partner will discuss about current issue. The topic that I and my partner choose is flood disaster. A flood is an overflow of water that submerge land that is usually dry. I will talking about why flood disaster happen or the causes of flood disaster. Heavy rains is one of the flood disaster causes. The simplest explanation for flooding is heavy rains. No matter how you live, you are surrounded by infrastructure and system designed to move rainwater into appropriate basin and reservoirs. In most cases, the infrastructure does its jobs, and you never have to think about where the rain goes when it runs off. When it rains heavily, however, those systems are overwhelmed and that water doesn't drain nearly as quickly as it needs to. In short, the drainage system back up and the water rises and sometimes into homes. This typically happens only in cases of sustained heavy rains over a long period. Furthermore, overflowing rivers is also why flood happen. You do not necessarily need to have heavy rains to experience flooding in your area. For example, if you live along a river and areas upstream from your experience heavy rains, it could lead to a serious overflow where you live. Most larger rivers include a series of dams to help manage large amounts of rainfall, and most river systems are managed by government authorities. Sometimes, however, those authorities have to make tough decisions about how to operate dams. They often can manage the water and prevent flooding altogether, but not always. Lastly, broken dams is also one of the flood disaster causes. Much of America's infrastructure was built in the 20th century, so it is getting old. When heavy rains come and water level rise, aging dams can fail and unleash torrents of water on unsuspecting households. This is part of what happened after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005. Levees failed and made the flooding far worse than it would have been otherwise. While we have come to depend on 20th century architecture, and much of it does its job well, there is always a possibility that a structure will fail.
Good morning to Madam Shaimala. My name is Ahmad Daniel Shazik bin Abdul Aziz. My matric number 10DIB 21F1047. Today I want to talk about current issues, which is flood disaster. I found there were three effects of flood disaster. First, floods can harm wildlife. Flooding can have a negative effect on wildlife, causing drowning, disease proliferation, and habitat destruction. In 2012, hundreds of animals, including many vulnerable one-horned rhinoceros unicorns, were killed in floods that swamped Kaziranga National Park in the Indian state of Assam. Unpredictable floods can be harmful even to aquatic life. For example, fish can be displaced and their nests destroyed. Second, floods cause sedimentation and erosion. Floodwaters can also alter the landscape. For instance, by eroding riverbanks and causing them to collapse. As floodwaters carry material from the eroded banks, sediment becomes suspended in the water, which can degrade water quality and lead to harmful blooms of algae. Suspended sediment eventually settles out of the water in a process called sedimentation, which can clog riverbeds and streams, smother aquatic organisms, and destroy habitats. Erosion and sedimentation have a more negative impact on ecosystems that are already degraded or heavily modified. Third and lastly, floods carry contamination. Floodwater can be contaminated with pollutants such as agricultural pesticides, industrial chemicals, debris, and sewage. If contaminated floodwater enters the ocean, it can affect water quality and disrupt delicate ecosystems such as coral reef. In February 2019, marine biologists feared for the safety of the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Queensland, a state in Australia, after it was inundated with polluted floodwater. Two value can get from flood disaster are dragging rivers. The basic aim of dragging is to remove silt, which consists of fine sand, clay, and small particles of rock from the river's bed, potentially increasing its capacity to carry water downstream. The process usually involves an excavator or vacuum pump mounted on a barge or on the riverbank to remove silt from the river. But the issue of whether rivers should be dragged is not clear-cut. An illustration shows how dragging a river works from silt built up to a river bursting its banks and diggers removing excess silt. The Environment Agency says that while dragging can improve general land drainage, it cannot prevent rivers from flooding due to the large volumes of water involved. In some cases, dragging can even make flooding worse. Professor Dan Parsons from the University of Hull says it is the water surface slope of the river rather than the riverbed that is most important in moving water through a landscape. In lowland reaches where rivers meet tidal forces, dragging can actually make matters worse by reducing this surface slope. Dragging is also costly, sometimes harmful to the environment, and can weaken riverbanks as well as the foundations of bridges and weirs. After a major flood, large volumes of silt may accumulate in slow-flowing areas, and the river may need to be dragged repeatedly. Second, sustainable drainage. Sustainable drainage is often used in towns and cities, which are prone to flash flooding after sudden heavy rain. In urban areas, largest areas of ground are covered in concrete and tarmac. Rain is channeled straight into drainage system, which can become overwhelmed. A graphic shows drainage systems common in different types of environments, from urban to rural. In the UK, the Flood Act of 2010 obliged builders to landscape developments so that water from roof and driveways seeps into open ground rather than rushing into the water system. Guidelines suggest the ground should be able to absorb the water, a process now known as infiltration. Largest detention basins can also be built to collect rainwater and hold it, managing the volume of water entering urban rivers, while ponds offer further water holding capacity.
For value, as shown in many previous events, Malaysians are once again paying great attention and mobilizing various forms of appropriate assistance to those in need. Although we still hear that there are some inappropriate incidents, such as those who take the opportunity to dispose of damaged clothes, give and spread false and inaccurate information, cheat in collecting donations, and practice narrow politics in the process of giving and receiving aid. There are still many parties, both federal and state government, private agencies, non-governmental organizations, and many individuals play a variety of roles. Hopefully, this community that support each other will continue to thrive without waiting for disaster. Furthermore, another value for flood disaster is operational priorities. In disaster situation or an environmental problem that stems from poor planning, we can see that the most important thing that needs to be saved is lives. This is not something that is awkward to hear, but rarely paid attention to. However, the various humanitarian aid provided is clearly aimed at saving human lives. Therefore, every citizen must be nurtured to appreciate the life of every human being is very valuable and must be defended from any threats. Fortunately, some residents live nearly hilly areas and manage to escape there despite having to be there for several days without enough supplies and facilities while waiting for help to arrive.